Hello, listener. I have a new features on the podcast. Now you can click on the link directly send me a message so that I can hear how has Beyondhood impact you? How does Beyondhood make you feel? It'd be lovely to hear and it's super easy. Go to the show notes above the description. There's a link. Say click here to direct message. Once you do that, it will directly link to your phone. And don't worry, I won't be able to see your phone number. I'll just receive the encouragement or comment from you. Looking forward to hear direct message from you all.
Childhood, adolescent, adulthood, and elderhood. Welcome to Beyondhood, where we go beyond elderhood, one chat at a time.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Beyondhood podcast. After a summer break, we're ready to bring on Season 2 to share with you a lot more stories that make you appreciate older adults' wisdom and their life experience. In Season 2, we're going to have story from immigrant from Asia to older adult who started their own company in their later stage of life to help other older adults repurpose their life, to seeing how photography can help keep family legacy. For our first episode back on Season 2, Episode 11, we have Paul Long. I met Paul through another podcast. The moment I heard him talking about how he sees later stage of life, how he call it olderhood, how see his new purpose in this stage of life, I knew I had to contact him. As a fellow storyteller himself, he brings that energy to captivate you. Thankfully, once I reached out to him and shared with him what the Beyondhood podcast is, he was more than eager to come join us. Without further ado, let's go. Paul, welcome to the Beyondhood podcast. We're so delighted to have you here.
It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this.
First of all, could you share with us what is your name, where do you live, and what is your chronological and biological age, please? In Season 2, I want to start asking my Beyonder, what is their chronological age and biological age? For those of you who don't know, chronological age is a fixed number that's calculated in year, month, and dates. It is not affected by health, lifestyle, or genetic. In simple words, chronological age is the age you calculate based on the birth year you have. Biological age, it is an estimate of how old a person's body is based on factors like DNA, change to chromosome, and it is influenced by a variety of factors, including genetics, lifestyle, and environmental exposure. The reason I wanted to ask our Beyonder what are their chronological and biological age is I want to make sure we are using the better predictor of health outcome, which is biological age, to understand and get rid of the ageism of someone who may be 78 based on their chronological age, and we have certain expectation or judgment against them. On the other side, I want to promote more biological age so we understand this age can be changed and be factor, and is a better predictor of health outcomes.
My name is Paul Long, and boy, where have I lived? Born in Knoxville, moved to Houston, grew up in Dallas, a little bit in Columbia, South Carolina, lived in Chicago, went to college in Carbondale, Illinois, did television news in Austin, Minnesota, Des Moines, Iowa, and Detroit, Michigan, lived in Grosse Pointe, and now I live near Ann Arbor.
Wow, you have lived everywhere.
Well, that part of that was the news business. Both my father's being in the news business and then me. And then in terms of my chronological age versus my real ages, technically I'm 68. My bio age is about 20, 25 years younger than that. And when I've gone into the doctor pretty much only for yearly checkups, he says he has patients that are 40 years old in a lot worse shape than I am. And in terms of my spirit and desire and drive and interest in making a difference and learning new things and being innovative, the same I was when I was in my 20s and ever since. When it comes to my maturity level, my wife says sometimes I'm about 17.
That's usually what the wife said. We are going to start with your childhood. Where were you born and where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Can you share a story that defines who you were as a child with us?
Well, as I mentioned, I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, so my family on both sides were pretty much Southern. But when I was 9 months old, we moved to Houston, Texas, because my father was in radio news. He was a news director, managing editor. He anchored, also did reporting and such. And so he got a job to put a station in Houston on the map, as the owner said. But then we moved from there when I was 4 to Dallas, where that owner's flagship station was. So I pretty much grew up in Dallas, Texas. And then I did my senior year of high school in Columbia, South Carolina. My father passed away suddenly when I was 15 and my mother remarried. So my memories of childhood, on the one hand, it was very unfortunate because I grew up in kind of a 2-block radius where there weren't any other kids. And I had, unlike with my brother and sister, who are older than I am quite a bit, my mother was overly protective of me. So it was kind of a restricted, isolated childhood, which it did. I've even written about how being bored can be a very positive thing, not only for brain rest as we get older, but it requires you to be inventive to find things to entertain yourself. But probably one of the most definitive things was that my father being in radio news, and he was really, looking now as a professional myself, looking back, he was really exceptionally talented in just about all the respects as a writer and as a speaker and such. And as I got older in my childhood, get to go to the radio station and strip wire copy and bulk tapes, which means erase tapes that are being used anymore, and a little bit older, actually playing around in the production studio and playing DJ, and I'd even do that at home. And so the point of it is that at a very young age, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a news. I wanted to do what he did, and I also saw the power and the benefit of letting people know what's going on, giving them, like the U.S. Constitution, the one job that's not government in there is freedom of the press, so that people know what they need to know and can hold people accountable. And I said, that's a great service. And so I always wanted to do that. And when I got into college and started doing it for real, because the college I went to had a real FM radio station, a real VHF TV station, and I worked at other stations in the area, it came naturally to me. I had picked up so much, a lot of it by osmosis when I was growing up. So that was that's kind of a primary memory from childhood.
How did he become a news reporter?
That's a good question. And again, tragically, he died suddenly when I was about 15, and I never really found that out. His father had started in newspapers and in fact covered the Scopes Monkey trial, which was the famous trial in Tennessee where the teacher came up on charges for teaching evolution, and then went into a very successful business career, became an insurance executive, and then after he retired, he wrote a weekly column. And I know my father was under pressure from my grandfather saying, get in the insurance business and provide well for your family. But, that's a question that I'll never have the answer for as to why he did that. But he was very good. And like my grandfather, very talented at writing and, storytelling. They were incredible storytellers.
And so do you now as a storyteller. And we will get to that part in a little bit. Since we touched base on, you mentioned that your dad unfortunately passed away when you were 15. I know that was a very defining moment for you as a teenager. How did it impact you?
Yeah, I'll give it kind of a headline in that it's sometimes through crises such as that, or crises such as that, become the greatest opportunities of our life in a way. And it also speaks to, stuff happens to you in life There's no stopping that. The ultimate question is, how are you going to respond? What are you going to do about it? What are you even going to do with it? So again, I was 15 years old, and I was pretty much a wayward soul at that time. And my father and I were very, very close. There was a news business thing. We used to go fishing together. We go to Dallas Cowboy games together, things of that sort. And my mother and I weren't very close. She was having, some issues, some pretty serious issues at that time. And obviously being overly protective, we never really clicked that much. And my brother and sister were grown up and they had moved away. And, I had a lot of friends, but they were 15 also and going through their own stuff. I remember writing, he always drove the mobile news unit home. That was always our second car. And I remember driving down the road with him one time, and I hadn't done something. I can't remember what it was, but there's some stuff that I was supposed to be doing. And he said to me, someday I'm not going to be here to take care of it for you. And that was about 2 weeks before he died. And so there I was a few weeks after his death, and I snuck out of the house about midnight, went down to this park near our house, and I was sitting there, and I came to this realization that nobody's going to save me, that it's all up to me now. That, again, my mother and I are not aligned at all, brother and sister gone, everything else, that if I'm going to make anything out of myself and my life, if I'm going to have a life that I want, it is 100% up to me. And in a way, that really saved my life, because even though in a way I kind of killed time until I graduated high school, because there's only so much you can do. When I got out of high school, I hit life with a vengeance, with this drive to get into broadcasting, which I did in television news, and to get my bleep together and turn into something and be something and have that life that I wanted. And I wrote about that recently because it's really true for all of us at any phase in our life. No one can save us. People can help, they can support, they can encourage, they can love you. But it's up to each one of us. If something's not right with our life, if we want to achieve something, if we don't want to get out of if we want to get out of a problem, it's always up to us. And yet too many people think, well, first of all, the poverty mindset of it's someone else's fault. Okay, fine, it's someone else's fault. The abundant mindset says, what are you going to do about it? And I've been blessed and graced with the fact that I did something about it.
If we ask you to go back to that moment, was this something that you as a kid were brought up to think that way? Or was it because your father suddenly passed away that triggered you to have that thinking?
It was definitely the crisis. It was definitely the situation that triggered the realization. Now, I'm doubly blessed by the fact that I was only 15 years old, because even as an adult, sometimes I have a hard time coming to a realization such as that. And I do wonder, I'll be personal here and say, was that God? Was that my father? Or was it just in me? And in a way, it doesn't matter, because it was there for me to have that, because it was also the reality. And I've always been pretty good. And again, maybe it's just the way I wired. Maybe it was the way I was brought up. I don't know, of accepting the reality for what it is. Eckhart Tolle, when I first started listening to him, he kept saying that the importance, the key is surrender, it's acceptance. And I'm like, what? No, if I don't like something, I'm not going to surrender to it. I'm not going to accept it. I was totally missing his point. His point is that when the situation is something, the very first thing you have to do is accept the fact that it is what it is. And when you think about it, we often spend so much time being upset about it and resisting it and not accepting it. And that's a complete useless waste of time, rather than putting your focus on what am I going to do about it. Real quickly, the example he gives is like when you get to the airport and you're running late and the security line's backed up and everybody spends that time being upset. Well, there's nothing you can do about it. So you just accept the fact that there it is. And maybe next time get there earlier. So, yeah, I definitely, what I did was accept the reality hit me that there is no one that is going to swoop in and take me away and plop me down gently in a better place. I was going to have to do it myself.
Mm.
I was accepting the situation for exactly what it is. And again, then as a life lesson so many times through my life, because, I've had other challenges and crises that has come back to me. And it's like, okay, it is what it is. Let's put all the energy, all the focus, all the attention, all the effort on getting out of it, over it, or where I need and want to be.
Wow, we can hear from your energy by the way you explain it. That definitely have a change of trajectory of how you see your life later on, which we're going to come back to it in a little bit. You also mentioned that you had a lot of other friends who are going through different things for them. I want to bring you back to that environment. Did you enjoy school back then? And how were your friends being there for you when this happened? Since you and your mom might not have the best relationship and you and your siblings are quite far apart in age.
In terms of high school, I hated it. I just found it, I do have imbued upon me somehow this rebellious, screw the rules. And I've even written about, by the way, I've written about that father situation. I've written about screw the rules too, except I used more harsh language because most people who succeed at all kinds of things don't go with the rules, especially if they're societal rules or parental rules or whatever, and just wasn't getting anything out of it. And I was very much in this mode of I want to get on with it. I want to get out of high school and go on with it. I also say my senior year in high school, I had to move to South Carolina because my mother remarried and the school system there at the time was just worthless. I just wanted to get the hell out of it. With my friends back in Dallas, especially, and by the way, I did make some good friends in South Carolina who I'm still in touch with. It wasn't as bad as I made it out to be. But anyway, I was really appreciative of how much they were there for me and how much they supported me. But I'll give you another quick life insight. And again, one of the things that I put out a lot in my current endeavor, which is entitled, I Don't Want to Hear It, But I Need to Hear It. So for some months after my father passed away, I was in the backyard of a friend's house with one other friend. And these weren't even my closest friends. These were just kind of second tier level friends, if you will. I remember Eddie Smith said to me, Paul, I have no idea what you're going through. It's so rough about your father, but you're really acting pretty screwed up, kind of being a jerk, and you're kind of being screwed up, and it's not you. And my reaction to that was instantly defensive. Who are you to think? I didn't say any of that. I just listened to it, but I was really mad, really. Well, you don't know what I'm going through. How dare you say that to me? Was going through my head. And I said, okay, cool. It's a little upsetting to hear. I'm going to go walk around the block for a couple of minutes. I'll come back. And when I walked around the block, I calmed down and I realized he was right. I was acting like a jerk. I'd fallen off the rails, so to speak. And that taught me another important life lesson that I use to this day. And it's a good lesson for everybody, that very often, in the first place, the things that we don't want to hear are the very things that we need to hear, that we cannot within ourselves be totally aware of the way that we're being or how we might be screwing up or how we might be, whatever, whether it's a relationship or business or just life or whatever. And that even to this day, so many years later, when I start hearing it because of that experience, what I learned is that when that person's saying it, I'm still feel defensive. I still want to lash out. I'm still upset. But I know that at the latest, by tomorrow morning, I will have calmed down and I will think about what they say. And I'd say if it's happened 10 times, that 7 times they've been right. And that the other 3 times, it's like, no, they're not right. But I waited until I calmed down and actually explored what they had to say to see if there was some truth in it, because I didn't want to hear it, but I got better. I was made better. I did better, whatever, by actually listening.
But as a 15 years old boy, how do you control yourself? Because I have been in the situation and I'm not even 15 and I do lash out and regret it. At that moment, how did you control your emotion to not to react?
For one thing, it was a good question. I don't remember that well, but I mean, they were friends and I did know that they were actually trying to help me. and I needed my friends at that time. So the only thing I can say is, or maybe I was graced once again, and it may have been the relationship, because definitely my mother and I went through a really bad stretch there, and I was much less, unfortunately, which, by the way, got resolved after I moved away. We had a great relationship until her death at a ripe old age. So that's a good question. I don't think I can accurately answer it.
Well, this will be for the listeners to find out. Keep it cool when you are 15. That is very impressive. Now we touch base on your childhood, about your grandfather, your dad's profession, to unfortunately how he passed away, but positively impact you in a way that you still remember now. Before we move into your adulthood, about your career, which I'm very excited to talk about, I do have two more lighthearted questions that I want to ask you. What was your favorite movie as a teenager, and when did you first see it? Do you remember it? And why do you love it? And do you still love it now?
Yes, good question. What suddenly popped up into my mind, and I'll call it my favorite because of what I learned from it. And everybody listening might be a little like, oh my God, what did he learn from it, when I say that it was The Godfather. What it was about that movie is that I read the book first before it came out by Mario Puzo. Great book. And it was just a really good book, great read. I was really excited for the movie to come out. And I remember Barry Chandler and I going to see it. So I can remember his friend I saw it with. And I had very high expectations for that movie, and so did he, because he loved the book as well. And I imagined what it was going to look like, and, maybe it's this actor or that actor, and I had high expectations for it. And then I saw it, and I saw what Francis Ford Coppola, the director and screenwriter, did with it in terms of everything about it. The script, the actors. These actors I never would have envisioned doing it. Just blew my mind as to way above expectations. It was almost like unimaginably better and deeper, and the performances, it's like when I heard that Marlon Brando was going to play the Godfather, Don Corleone. Really? I know, he was considered the world's greatest actor at the time. Many people still consider him to be. And as a quick aside, for my wife, she called him Uncle Bud because her father, Brando, grew up together in Libertyville, Illinois, and they were lifelong friends until Brando's death. So Kim knew him and went down to Tete Row, his atoll a couple of times. But it really showed me and kind of pushed my envelope or the realm of possibilities of how you can take something, even something really great like that story, elevate it, how you can push it farther, how you can make it more exceptional, how you can take it beyond people's expectations. And that's stuck with me. That became one of those imbued kind of fundamental things, like, what can I do with this?
Last question I want to ask you before we move to elderhood is, what was the most important historical event or period that you remember, and why was it?
Well, in my youth, I had two of them. One was certainly the Kennedy assassination. And being in Dallas, my father was in the Kennedy motorcade. In fact, if you've ever watched a documentary, you may have heard his voice. So I certainly remember that. But I would say it was the moon landing. And because I was and remain a big aerospace devotee buff, I followed it all. It took National Geographic, and National Geographic covered and everything. And in terms of an overall human endeavor, and what a lot of people don't realize is everything that went into that. I mean, the scope, the innovation, the smarts. They just think of the astronauts, but the people in mission control and and then you see the mission control and there are 200 other people and 18-year-old computer whizzes for 1969, if you can imagine, at MIT on the hotline trying to figure things out. It was a human. There was politics behind it. The competition between the United States and Soviet Union, but it was a great human endeavor, and I think it showed some of the best. What I always take away from it, what it always reminds me of, is an example of one of the things that's great about our humanity.
Where did you watch it when it happened?
watching it at home with my father and mother. Yeah, I can vividly see it. I can remember the goosebumps.
Wow, you are the ultimate storyteller. From your emotion to the way you speak, it is captivating. Now we touch base on your childhood and your adolescence. I'm very excited to move on to this part of you starting your career. From listening to you before, you mentioned your father was your inspiration to become a news reporter. What happened in college and how did you eventually become a news reporter?
College, the best piece of advice I got was from Dr. Richard C. Ilch, who was one of the professors. And then I was one of the students he took under his wing. And he said, well, Paul, someday when you're a television news reporter, the biggest challenges you're going to have isn't the big story. It's not the plane crash. It's not the presidential assassination or Watergate or something like that. He says your biggest challenge is that piece of crap story that you have to do. That, the fourth year in a row, you've worked Christmas Day and you got to do a story on people having to work Christmas Day. And that's when you have to use in a positive way your ego. That's when you have to make that story something special that is worthy of having your name, your face, and your effort on it. And that always left me in some of the favorite stories that I ever did. In fact, probably my favorite all-time story was one I did about Memorial Day. And back in those days, I got more mail, pre-email, on that story than any other story I'd ever done. I knew I was going to have to work on Memorial Day, so I went to the Google back then, which was the resource desk library, which my father taught me. I'd give everybody a bottle of liquor for Christmas to good stead, and I'd call them up and said, hey, I got this story. Is there a town around here? Yeah, there's this. That's great. Oh, I need an ending. Oh, have you ever, the poem from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier? No. And I'm like, almost when I talked to him, and it was just this story that brought meaning to Memorial.
Why was it your favorite story?
It clicked. It clicked. In the first place, it was my favorite story because I learned a lesson and I applied it and I benefited from it. You ever notice that feeling yourself that when you learn something or somebody teaches you something and you leverage it and then you just hit a home run with it?
Yeah, you have that moment.
It's that great feeling. And you really felt like did something exceptional. It just put the effort into it.
Then what happened? What was your first job like? Can you share with us about your career?
My first job, which I got through a couple of people I went to college with, who they ended up there. My first job was in Austin, Minnesota, small town where Hormel is. It's the only county in Minnesota without a lake in it, not a garden spot, but received their experience that has served me to today. Because it was that small market television station and the best news director I ever had, John Janes. And we would do, each of us as reporters, we would do 2 or 3 or even 4 stories a day. And we do it ourselves, board it ourselves, and come in and fight over 2 edit rooms. Early days of videotape, meaning, the machine's not working right and you're banging it, tilting it to get it to lock up, but things of that sort. And basically, I learned how to pull stuff off. I learned how to pull stuff out of my ass. I learned how to figure things out, go up to Owatonna, do a package, with your voice on and everything of this, do something for the anchor to read, show some video of this, and then find another 2 stories while you're up there. No cell phones, no internet. Driving back through Blooming Prairie, Minnesota, 45-minute drive, riding on my left knee in a snowstorm in an AMC Pacer. But I learned it's got to get on the air. You got to get it on in time. It's got to be right. And it's got to be good. I had to learn how to be innovative. I learned how to pull stuff off. And so jumping ahead years later, I know we haven't gone this yet, but my second career of being content creator for most of the car companies in the world, things like that. And I'm out in the Nevada desert, but I've got a camera cars and I've got 15 people and all that stuff. And you've still got to pull stuff out of your butt. You've still got to figure out how to overcome the situation. You still got to figure out, I don't have the budget for 3 days. How am I going to do this in 2? Or sometimes I don't have 3 days, which I need. How do I pull it off in 1 day? And I always did. And so one's acceptance, like I was talking about before, and the other thing is just learning how to think it through and not saying, well, it's not the way I think it should be, so therefore it's a problem and I'm not going to do it or whatever. Figuring out, and in television, and it's kind of funny because when I was in that business, some people came from TV, the content creation business, production business. you could always tell somebody from TV because TV it's like life. It has to happen. It's you either get it on or you don't. It's either right or it's wrong and you got trouble. And these were always people that just knew how to do it. There was just a different thing about them that you could almost pick up from instant.
When you first started as news reporter in the late 70s, was it like what we see today in the TV with live TV, or you had to put it together?
Good question. The remote live stuff, which was possible, it was at that point, we were about 3 years away from live trucks. I'd be going out and recording it. But if I wanted to be on, like holding the microphone, but recorded, very often what I'd have to do is I'd have to take and put it on the roof of the car, and then I'd take my wallet and I'd kind of balance it, and I'd roll it, and I'd step back and I'd talk, and then in the camera you could actually watch playback and go, oh man, I'm way over to the side. Yeah, and then we had studio, of course, where the anchors were and things of that sort. But yeah, it was a few years later when I had gone to WHO TV in Des Moines, Iowa, a great city, and had a blast there. That was 4 years of nirvana of doing my profession. That's when we got a live truck and we started doing more remotes and things of that sort.
Got you. When you start, there was not a live remote truck yet. Wow, that's very interesting to learn because, for example, people like me who are not familiar with the industry just thought it could always be like that. But listening to you, there was a period of time that wasn't like that. And then technology advanced, and that's how you got into see what we see now. You touch base on you being as a one-man band news reporter, and then you moved to Iowa. And then what happened? What were you reporting? And then how did you eventually start your own production in 1989?
Well, yes, in Des Moines, those are real salad days. That was a time when just everything was right, whether it be Kim and I and our relationship. And it was a great station. We were all really pulling together. We were all friends, socialized together. But my goal was to make it to a top 10 market by my third move. And as a okay-looking male, back then, the stations were seeking other attributes, not the least of which was looks. And I did. I made it to NBC in Detroit. And I got here, and first of all, the vice president of news, who I wanted to work under, who was a true newsman, a true, honest, deliver the news mandate, it switched, and it started getting into fear news and sensational news. The political skewing hadn't happened yet. But I just didn't like the stories that I was doing. I was legitimate stories turned down to say, go do a fear in the suburbs story, because in this affluent suburb, there have been 3 breaks. Who can I talk? Where did you get this fear thing? How do you know that there's fear? Well, we don't. Well, go find it. It's just like, this is not news. This is not why I got into the business. I kind of had a choice. I had a relatively solid chance of going with one of the big networks. But Kim and I were also at the point where we were talking about having a family. And I knew that, especially just starting at the network, I'd be what's called a crash and burn bureau, where literally you can go in one day and not come home for 3 months because you got to go to this story, then they send you to El Salvador, and then they send you to, so I realized I needed to get out of television news because I wasn't going to keep doing this crap news that made me angry. So I'm thinking, now what? And then I'm happy to circle back to, I made a major mistake, but still benefited from it. So I tried to figure out, what can I do? What's something I could do rather than what should I do for my whole life? And in Detroit area, what people didn't realize was a huge production community because of not just the Detroit Big Three.
In the U.S. automotive industry, the term Big Three is used for the country's 3 largest motor vehicle manufacturers, which were General Motors, the Ford Motor Company, and Tesla. And they all headquartered in the Detroit area. This was true in the 90s, and it has been changed since then.
Kmart and Little Caesars and other companies, plus other car makers. And I'm like, well, gosh, every day as a reporter, I'm the talent, I'm the writer, I'm the director, I'm the producer. Maybe I can bring a new angle to this industry. And so sure enough, quit reporting, As a quick aside, the main weather guy came to me and said they're looking for somebody just to do weather on the weekend. And of course, we just bought a house at Grosse Pointe. For about 3 or 4 years, I did the weekend weather and filled in a few weeks a year. And my axiom about television news is the more you work, the less you make, and the less you work, the more you make. So even though I was working part-time, I was making more than I did as a full-time reporter at full benefits, and I had a clothing allowance at Saks Fifth Avenue. And it's the easiest job I've ever done in my life. I get up in front of the green graphics and the maps and stuff, and there's a low pressure system coming in from what it's going to. And it was easy because if it's like partly sunny for the rest of the week, I'd have some shtick and I'd be like, so very, very genuine, very self-effacing, very casual. If there was a mistake, I'd play to it or something like that. And people loved it for wanting you to be authentic rather than this perfect blow dried. There's a low pressure, people they come up to me and they'd say, wow, Paul, I love watching you. It's like you're a real person. Yeah, okay, I am. I wasn't a real meteorologist. I just played one on TV. And then if it was bad weather, like tornadoes or blizzards or something, I was being a reporter. I was just reporting the information. I did not have to do a raw forecast myself. It was an easy and great job. But then during the week, I was building my content creation business.
Well, I would like to circle back a little bit on when you were a news reporter. What was your favorite news that you have ever reported? Or most memorable, the one that you still remember till today?
The 1984 Iowa caucuses.
Paul mentioned the 1984 Iowa caucuses. What is caucuses, you ask?
Caucuses is one of the two ways that people help state and political party chooses presidential nominee. A lot of us might have heard of presidential primary, which is most states hold primaries 6 to 9 months before a presidential election. Primary voter chooses their preferred candidate anonymously by casting secret ballot. Several states hold caucuses in the months leading up to a presidential election. Caucuses are meetings run by political parties that are held at the county, district level. Some caucuses choose candidates by secret ballot. Others require participants to divide themselves into groups according to the candidate they support.
So that's where I felt like a lot of me and my influences came together. For anybody listening around the world, they've probably heard of the Iowa caucuses. That's the first in the nation thing. I don't really think the caucuses should be that legitimate. They're that informal in terms of a real gauge, but there they are. And we were in between news directors, and I knew the new news director that was coming in shortly before the caucus started in January. And I had thought about my father. For instance, when he was told to get that radio station on the map, so to speak, in Houston, I read a 4-page memo, I still have it, to the owner about all these innovative and unique and clever and smart things that he did, rather than some of the obvious stuff that really did put them on the map, especially with a couple of big stories. That was in me. And so I started thinking about our caucus coverage, both leading up to it and the big night. And I kind of thought, what kind of stuff could we do? Just transcend what the local stations had done before. And some of it was, let's go network. Let's do what the networks are doing. Go beyond that. So, for instance, in the Savory Hotel where the Democrats, because it was the Democrats versus Reagan, who was the incumbent, thought, let's have an anchor desk, not just standing there in the crowd of orders and everything with a camera and a microphone that's hooked up to the station. Let's have our own anchor desk. Let's do these kinds of graphics. Let's do this kind of coverage. Let's do this kind of build up to it. And everything else. So I called him up with my ideas, and he said, run with it. He said, I can't, just keep me informed, but I can't do anything because I'm not working there yet officially. So I did it. I did just this massive transformation of our coverage, and we just killed the competition, just blew them out of the water, and it all worked. And it was all great. That was very, very satisfying. And here's an interesting thing. Recently, for my current thing, I took a premier coaching course, a gold standard. Even though I'm not really doing one-on-one coaching, it's learning a lot about how to listen, how to, support people. And they taught how do you, and this is a great thing for all of us to do, especially as we get older, because the caucus night put into it. And they ran us through the exercise because one of the most important things we can hold onto in life is, what do we value? I mean, how many people and I won't put you on the spot, can immediately tell you, what do you really value in life? What do you really value in life, holistically, anywhere, across the board, all aspects of life? And a lot of people, especially when you get older, go, well, or they might have one or two things. But, it's one of those things when you really think about it. And the exercise is basically think about that moment in your life to date where you really thought, boy, this is great. Like, it's impossible to say everything's there and everything's the way it should be. But when it was at its absolute best, that you really were like, this is great. I value all of these things. For me, it was that night. And by the way, when I did the exercise, at first I couldn't think of anything. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never had that moment. But then I thought, sitting on the cliff at Point Lobos near Big Sur, or something like that. And then I thought of that night. And I just thought, and I just got this incredible, what's beyond a warm and fuzzy? I just got this great feeling. And then I just very quickly thought, what was it about that night? It wasn't just about accomplishing it. Part of it was in terms of expressing myself. So all the things that I did, how easy I made it, how determined I was, how natural I pulled it all off. But other things came into play too. The other parts of my life, my now wife, Kim, we'd been together since college, but we weren't married at the time. She was standing over there a few feet away. And I had this appreciation that I was in this incredible relationship with somebody I never imagined I could have been with. And then next to her was a friend of ours from college. And then I thought of my friends, all of these things. And that right there in a list of like 6 or 7 things immediately told me, because I was thinking about what do I value? I realized, wait a minute, there's some things missing in my life now there's some things in my life that I highly value that I'm not pursuing or fostering or doing. And that was big for me.
From listening to you, it wasn't just the news that night. It was a lot of things that happened during that night that made it become one of your most memorable stories. Now we talk about you were doing weather forecast for the weekend and you're thinking about how to use your own production, what you learned as a news reporter to go into Detroit, the car industry, the big three. What was that story? How did it happen? During that time, when you have your own production, Paul Long production, what are some of the stories you can share with us during those time?
Actually, I was doing the weather and launching my business at the same time. During the week, I did Paul Long Productions. On the weekends, I was a weather buddy. And I'd actually even kind of started before I left news, because I was at that time the lead night beat reporter. I had whatever the lead story was. So I had the mornings free to go meet with people. Well, first of all, I was on television, so I could at least get in the door, to a lot of places. And I networked, right? I was introduced to a guy who was a writer named Chuck Dapos. He gave me 11 names of people to contact, and I did work for 10. I was very fortunate in that I got into kind of a higher quality, higher echelon, higher creative path of things. So I was able to do some really cool stuff. Part of what fed that thing in me to be innovative, like I talked about with the caucuses and the way my father was that I was doing a lot of stuff, some very ambitious stuff that I had never done before or that no one had ever done before. So I even created and then produced and directed and executed the center display area performances for the North American Toyota Auto Show tour in the major cities. And again, we did innovative. One car that they wanted to highlight, we had a big curved wall, one car on one side, one on the other. For one side, it was the Corolla, pretty vanilla intro. But I did a wall climbing thing before wall climbing was in, and big video monitors embedded, and a big screen, and somebody swinging around and delivering. And then on the other side, it was the first year of the Sienna minivan. And I had an elephant, a zebra, and a lion were looking for in a minivan. I got comedic actors, and I hired, this was what was cool, hiring who had forgotten more than you knew about something. So for instance, I hired a Broadway costume design makeup artist that had done the musical Cats, because I wanted them in a lion's outfit and stuff, but I wanted faces. And so they did the faces like from the musical Cats, if you've seen that. So I got to do some really, really cool stuff. So business theater, big car reveals with pyro and lasers, big screens and stuff. Videos, documentaries, literally developed and created and then executed, a couple of thousand videos and live events.
Wow, how do you get your creativity? How do you combine your different expertise together? Let's say people are in the middle of their career. How do you generate curiosity and creativity that you have shared with?
Well, two things, and one could be a little bit easier than the other. I mean, curiosity, I can't imagine not being curious about anything. Having curiosity about life and about things and about people is cool. And it's development, it's learning, lifelong learning. One of the keys to not only living longer, healthier, but also more fulfilled and even successful is lifelong learning. It's always being curious. Lifelong learning doesn't necessarily mean taking more college courses, although it can. And so curiosity and having that desire, I mean, making a note, I might write an article and do a video on this about the benefits in pursuit of curiosity to get you growing and to get you unstuck. Because, if you're trying to figure out how to transform your life at any adult age, curiosity and having that curiosity is going to lead you to answers that aren't readily obvious to you. And if you need to change your life, well, then you need different thinking than the thinking that got you in the life that you're in now. So that's curiosity. The creative thing, I think people are a lot more creative than they think they'd be. It depends on how you define creative. The only major car company I never did work for no known reason was Honda. But I did work with all the car companies around the world. And I deal with a lot of engineers in one capacity or another, even if it'd be like a new product car and they'd send a product engineer with them to make sure. And those guys and women would always be like, I'm not creative at all. And I'm like, look at this car. Look at this innovation. Look at how you improved this. That's as creative as Michelangelo. We're all creative. Look at a parent. Look at a single mom raising two kids and somehow raising them well and putting food on the table. That takes creativity. We all have that capability. The moment you think, well, I'm not creative, well, then you're not. Now, if it's being creative like an artist, well, I can't even draw a good stick figure. That's not my thing. And so the second thing I would say is that what I pursued something that both demanded and gave me the opportunity to be creative. And like a lot of things, it's something you put your attention and focus on and you develop.
The reason I asked you that question on the spot is because through our conversation, curiosity and creativity come to my mind when I think of using one word to describe you. That's why I was interested to hear how you come up with them. Now I want to put a pause on your production and switch gear. You have won an Emmy for your documentary, A Passing of the Torch. How did you come up with that documentary? What causes you to produce the documentary? How did it make you feel when you won such a prestigious award for your documentary?
Good question. And first of all, what happened was that, so I live near the University of Michigan, and I had done a few things for them, and I knew some people there. And I got a call one day for somebody. So it's pretty famous, and there is a plaque on the front of the Michigan Union, which is the student center. Presidential candidate John F. Kennedy, he was candidate then, spoke on the steps of the student union and brought up the concept of the Peace Corps. And so the 50th anniversary was coming up. And what they called me up about is they said that one of the people that organized the student movement, national student movement, to kind of almost force Kennedy to actually, when he became president, create the Peace Corps, was going to be in town. And they needed somebody to interview it. And they said, we don't even know what we're going to do it, but can you do a little bit of homework? And on this date, this time, can you come here and do an interview with them? And so I did it. Well, again, here's that curiosity. Here's that being open to things. Al Guska, brilliant man, great guy. He was a professor emeritus at another university when I interviewed him. And I just did my homework. And in the first place, I started learning, I didn't know what, really? And then I interviewed him. A lot of questions, a lot of discovery. I mean, sometimes when you do interviews for video or for news, you know what you need to get from the person. You're not asking questions, you're getting soundbite. Did I get soundbite? Did I get something that could come? But it was very open-ended. And so the point of it was that it was kind of rush hour when I was heading back home. So I got home in about 30 minutes, and by then I had the documentary figured out because he told me this story that inspired me and realized not only a great story it was, but how much of a deeper story it was. So very briefly, 1960, February 18th, John F. Kennedy was a candidate, youngest candidate. We all knew who John Kennedy was. And he had been in New York to do one of his famous debates with Richard Nixon. And he was flying to Ann Arbor to spend the night, only to spend the night in the student union before doing a whistle-stop tour on a train the next day across Michigan. And when he got to the student union at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday night, there were 10,000 students waiting for him. 1960 is a school night. Women had a 10 p.m. curfew, and most of those students couldn't vote because you had to be 21 years old.
I did some research on this. Throughout the 1960s, a lot of the U.S. universities have a 10 o'clock or 10:30 p.m. curfew for their women residents.
Why? So this is what this is what a curious person does. Hey, were there 10,000 students? The long shot of the story, and what to me is almost the bigger story than the development of the Peace Corps, was that it was really one of the first student movements. It was the first student movement of the 60s. And it taught me that 1960s think of as sex, drugs, and rock and roll and protest marches. But why did that major societal change take place? And the fact of the matter is, because I talked to so many people, some of them famous and notable, Tom Hayden, who was the famous activist who was married to Jane Fonda. He was the editor of the student newspaper, the Michigan newspaper. Ted Sorensen, who was an advisor to Kennedy. I did the last interview with him before he passed away. Bill Moyers, brilliant man, was an aide to Lyndon Johnson. And what I discovered was that 1960 was a time in the world where the socioeconomic and even technology advancements had reached a point in which people could be more self-determinant of what they would do with their lives. In South Korea, students overthrew a military government. All the colonial powers were being kicked out largely by students. And in America, as all of these people who were there that night, who were a part of the movement to start this, said, we were not going to accept what was on offer. We were not going to do what our parents said we were supposed to do, or society, or whatever. We were going to decide what we wanted our lives to be. So that was the alternate lifestyle thing, sex, drugs, and rock and roll being the extreme. But even people who were more conventional were experiencing this. And it was like, I'm going to do what I think is right for my life. In addition to that, I'm going to make a difference in the world that I'm going to be a part of. So the civil rights movement, women's rights, farm workers' rights, the ecology movement, all of that changed. And it disrupted society. And sometimes it was ugly or tragic. But it disrupted society enough that another thing happened that everybody can relate to here is look at how we now venerate the 20-something entrepreneur. In the 1960s, a 20-something entrepreneur would have been a drug dealer. There was no thing. Instead of the older man, being the gatekeeper in terms of money, in terms of being an entrepreneur, what the people who knocked those people down were Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and Sir Richard Branson. It completely changed. What is normal now was abnormal then. That's where it began. And so people were there to see Kennedy because they saw him as younger. He was talking about, and this is the problem with politics nowadays, is that what Kennedy did, what Reagan did, what both Roosevelts did, what Abraham Lincoln did, what George Washington did, what Winston Churchill did, is they gave us a vision. With Kennedy, it was called the New Frontier. And younger people could relate to him and gave hope and promise, and it inspired people to make positive change and move society forward.
Wow, I had a chance to watch some of your documentary on Vimeo. I haven't finished it yet, but it really drew my attention to look at how documentary captures one magical moment and then it transforms the era of the 60s. I will put the link to the show notes so our listener can actually watch it from Vimeo as well. Now we touched base on your career. I want to change a little bit of gear about your personal life. First, you mentioned that your wife was there when you did your most memorable news story. I want to ask, how did you guys meet? Can you share a little bit about your wife and what was one of your most memorable story with her? And how would you describe your relationship?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've been together for 46 years, and we can joke about that kind of thing. And she laughs extra hard. So, real quick story, the way we met, I say in college, I actually got dragged. I mean, like, it was almost like, why is this person insisting I go to this party? Went to a party. I basically picked up her roommate. And because back then my intention was I did not want to be in a relationship because I had to do like a year or so at a local station. And then I wanted to have a Hemingway-esque experience and go cover wars in El Salvador, places like the person I was, her roommate that I was dating, I knew we'd never be in a relationship, but it was just somebody go out and have fun. And her boyfriend came down. I didn't know she had a boyfriend. He came down to visit for Chicago. He was supposed to be there for 3 days, but it dragged on. And in the days pre-cell phone and texting, I'd show up and go, hi, Bruce, is Kim here? And Kim and I started hanging out together. And all of a sudden, we're looking at each other going, what just happened? It was just like, it was as if we were meant to be together. We are extreme opposites. We're aligned on a lot of fundamental things, but we are totally different people. And the relationship just kept going and going and going. And like every relationship, we've had our ups and downs. We still don't agree with things. There's still things where I'm right and she's still wrong. Say that tongue in cheek, of course. And I'm just incredibly blessed and grateful because we partner really well in life together.
I know that you guys have 2 sons together. Would you like to share some story about both of your sons and how would you describe them? What are their personality like?
So Carter and Christian are in their early 30s. They are 18 months apart. Kim and I look at each other sometimes and say, how did we do that? Because they really are. And you talk to my older friends and others, just say, great kids. They're 2 people who I admire irrespective of the fact that they're my kids. Carter played hockey and Christian played lacrosse. They don't have to be the captain of the team. They don't have to go to Harvard. They don't have to get a job for $100,000 right out of the gate. Our goal was to send them out in life as best as equipped as possible to handle life as possible, to be self-reliant and self-aware and to care, and then other things. If I balance a checkbook, I'll either have $1 million too little or $1 million too less, and I've really got $20 in the account. So she's very meticulous. So the boys learn finances and frugality and things of that sort. They are so frigging smart with their money that it makes me jealous almost. They're both just caring and aware people. They both live in Denver. Christian, my youngest, they both did some study abroad, which I highly recommend. It costs about the same amount as going to college that semester. And they got this worldview. They've been all over the world on their own in different ways. And it just broadened their perspective on things. And Christian's goal was that his second job would be overseas. And actually, through somebody in my network, he got a job in Shanghai, where he was for 5 years. And he was in a travel group and knew this woman for about 3 years before suddenly their relationship ignited. She's now my daughter-in-law. And they, by coincidence, live a 7-minute walk from each other in Denver now. And they both have good jobs. And we just feel very blessed and grateful for it.
Wow. I always like to ask my Beyond, what's the secret of keeping your relationship alive and being with the same person for so many years and still feel in love and be together?
Hey. Well, the number one thing is the intention that you are going to find ways to make things work. You have to have that intention. I wonder how many people just kind of bail. Things aren't ideal or idyllic or perfect. Kim and I are misaligned, which sounds worse than it is, but there are some things that we aren't quite aligned on that have existed almost since the beginning of our relationship, but we've still made it work because everything else is overwhelmingly wild. And it's accepting the way that, kind of like a tree falling on, it's accepting the way that she is, and she's accepted the way that I am. And there are certain things that we can't be this perfect nirvana coexisting things. But we work well together. We do really love each other. I can't imagine not being together. And so when that happens, we've had our moments. We've had our struggles or things in life that have occurred that have caused struggles. But if you're almost not really even thinking about it. And then when you do try, I'm a better communicator than she is, but when you do communicate about it, when you do express your true feelings about things, but you do them in a constructive way, not an accusory way, or I think you should do this, or, ways that cause the other person to be defensive. In fact, quickly, I heard a really great idea that I haven't had to use yet, but that if there's something really serious you need to talk to a mate about, and I've written about it on my Substack, is instead of having a discussion, write them a letter, which in the first place forces you to slow down, and you can do multiple drafts to just put it forth to them. This is how I feel. This is what I feel I need. It's not saying you're this, you're that, you're not doing this, which just creates a defensive front. But the point is that by giving them a letter and saying, this isn't bad, this is constructive, it's not divorce papers. First of all, when we listen to somebody, especially in an emotional conversation, what are you doing? You're sitting there thinking about, how am I going to respond to what that person said? You're not really listening, you're not really absorbing. And it takes the emotion of expression, micro-expressions, facial expressions, full tone, voice, things like that. And the big thing is it gives them saying, let's not talk about this for at least 24 hours. So it gives that person, as I alluded to earlier, some time to process it. The bottom line is the intent that we're going to figure it out, and we're going to make it work. If you're not right for somebody, well, then that won't work, and you'll know. But I think some people give up too easily.
Wow, while you're talking, I'm thinking about my own personal development. I'm going to write down this tip of writing a letter. I like it because it gives you time to process and put your thoughts instead of reacting. Now we're going to the later chapter of your life. I know that when both of your sons graduate and you were empty nested, you start to think about now what? Then that was around 2018. What happened then? And how did you move into what you do now?
So first of all, the now what? I walked up to my contemporaries, and I always just love saying, hey, let me ask you this. What's the number one question you keep asking yourself? Because they're in the same situation where the kids are leaving, other factors too. And I'd say, what's the number one question you keep every day? No. And I mean, for Kim, she was a stay-at-home mom. And she's like, I've lost a career and there's no opportunities for me to continue with. Really, my pursuit started even earlier than that. Like, let's say about 2010 or 11. First of all, coming out of the recession, which was a depression for me. And I started wondering what's next. That in the first place, as I alluded to earlier, I looked at that whole production business thing, content creation thing that I did. I'm very grateful for it. Put 2 boys through college, kept a roof over our heads. I got to do some cool stuff. I worked with some amazing people, some of them even clients, and I never should have done it. It was never right for me. So back in 89, I only thought what I could do, not what I should do. I only thought, how can I translate my talents and experience and abilities into something else? But I didn't think about my whole life. I didn't look at my life, and would this facilitate the whole life? If you've ever heard of the wheel of life or a life wheel, which is a circle and it's like pizza slices, a lot of them are different. I think it's, family, income, career, community, health, well-being, family, and ranking it 1 to 10 on it. But that's your life. And especially those of us who are income and career minded, we think career. And we don't think about the other aspects. And so I never stopped to think, what's going to facilitate the life I need and want in all respects, and especially wanting to become a father and be there for my kids and enjoy raising them and things of that sort. And so if I could go back to 1989, I'd say, nope, don't do that. Jump ahead to, let's say, 2011. I thought, okay, this has never felt right. I've never felt comfortable, even though I told some of my clients that when I was getting out of business a year or so ago, and they said, oh my God, it's like you were born for it. And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. Some things in your life have a shelf life, an expiration date. Jung said, what was truth in the morning is a lie in the afternoon. So not everything in life is continuous. Sometimes you got to move on. So what I realized is that fortunately, I was blessed with the insight of thinking, I cannot approach what I'm going to do next with my life with the same thinking that got me into this situation. I need to step back and I need to look at everything differently. And I even wrote down, well, what does everything mean? Well, that was everything from my situation or what I needed for an income, for what kind of lifestyle that I wanted, what did I want in terms of purpose and making a difference, what would I be passionate about doing and enjoy doing and afford, and what's going on with people who are then approaching retirement age. My favorite quote was from the Nobel Prize winning physicist from the early 20th century, Max Planck, which is also telling, how did he come up with quantum theory? How did he help Einstein come up with the theory of relativity? What kind of thinking enabled them to make those kinds of breakthroughs that people didn't even know existed? And here it is. When you change the way you look at things, The things you look at change. So when you shift your angle, when you step back and you look differently at your life and what you want and what you like and what you value, as I talked about earlier, all of a sudden everything starts changing. When you start doing your homework, when you have that curiosity, well, what's going on with other people? What I've started finding out, first of all, in those latter aspects, was that in the first place, okay, well, a lot of people are retiring, traditional retirement as we know it. You're not working anymore. You can do anything you want, bucket list and play golf and things of that sort. Well, I was finding out that there was a mega trend going on of people who were retiring. And after about a year or so of the retirement honeymoon, as it was called, the bliss. Hey, I don't have to go to work. I don't have to work with that jerk. They felt like they were failing at retirement. That's a quote. People saying, I'm failing at retirement. I'm miserable. And alcoholism, drug abuse, divorce, depression, suicide even were on the rise. Why was that? Well, because people, they were lacking relevance, fulfillment, purpose, and that purpose with a big P or a little p, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. They weren't being challenged anymore and getting the satisfaction out of life that you get from doing something hard. And they were losing their self-identity. Some of that because they weren't doing their work anymore. And that's a problem if your self-identity is based on, okay, that's not so good. And then I started thinking, well, what are other people doing? Well, a lot of people, because they couldn't afford to retire, were having to reimagine and redefine themselves and reconsider what to do. And they were forced into becoming like entrepreneurs. Kaufman Index showed the trend was that twice as many boomers were starting up businesses in the U.S. than millennials.
I read that.
Having 7 times the success rate. And a lot of these people who were forced, and in a lot of cases out of self-awareness, said getting fired and laid off because of ageism was the best thing that ever happened to me because I covered this other way to earn an income, and it's me and it's mine and I love it. But they were doing a multitude of other things. And then I started saying, yeah, but for how long? And then I started discovering that if you take moderately good care of yourself in terms of nutrition and exercise and less, you have community, you have friends, you have purpose, and you're doing things that you love, that is actually has a physiological positive impact on your longevity. Plus, it motivates you to exercise and eat right. And that you can live, it's not about lifespan, it's about health span.
Exactly.
That you can live healthy, active, and independent people that are around my age into our knees. And for you, Nicole, into your hundreds. That's going to be this is a trend now. In 5-10 years, that is the norm. You will not be thinking of this phase of life, which I call olderhood. You will not be thinking in any way similar than we're thinking of it now or my grandparents did. And that will be the new way of the world. Well, lo and behold, I started doing all of that stuff. And I thought, let's see here. I'm a storyteller. The thing I loved about news was telling people about things that they needed to know and didn't know about. And not a lot of people are talking about this. That's my new way forward. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the Pied Piper out there to bring this awareness, A, and then B, the second half. But the second thing then is that over that 10 or 12 years, still had to keep the business going and boys through college and stuff like that. But I put in my more than 10,000 hours, put in what, if you know Malcolm Gladwell, about 10 hours of work. I put in my 10,000 hours every day, listening, talking to experts, talking to people going through it, saying, do you, A, figure out what that new way forward is? And then B, how do you make that change? Because that kind of change we're resistant to change as humans. And so now, even though I'm still learning, I'm still curious, I'm starting to share it with people. And I'm like, hey, in seeking my new way forward, I found my new way forward, which is New Way Forward.
Speaking of New Way Forward, for the listener who might not know about New Way Forward as a company, who should come to you and who are your target audience? And what actually do you do in New Way Forward?
I am almost done with the pre-launch that. So I started it out as a side gig. Fortunately, business was too good. First of all, started a number of years ago, right before the pandemic. And I said, I'm going to do Ready, Fire, Aim. I'm just going to launch something and start putting stuff out on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and build a website. And I'm going to do a Ready, Fire, Aim to see what resonates with people and what the real deal is. You learn more by doing than you ever can by textbooks or YouTube tutorials, and called it Pro Boom. I thought I was so clever at the time. Well, one of the things that I learned was that was a terrible name. But the other thing is I thought boomers are going to be interested in this. No, I mean, I did have some boomer followers, but it was mostly Gen Xers and millennials. And then as I'm coming to this realization, the pandemic hit. And the pandemic is more transformative to society and to ourselves as individuals than we realize. Because when you think of the Great Resignation and the big quit and quiet quitting, really been great rethink, because people your age, all adult ages, started going, what am I doing? What is this? I'm not doing, there's got to be something more to life, or I'm just chasing, or I'm in this terrible situation. What I offer is, well, first of all, that awareness of what's available for all of us. So when I mention what people my age, the opportunities they have, when I share it with 30-somethings, let's say some 30-somethings that I know or clients, hey, Paul, what's this new way forward thing you're doing? And I would tell them the basics of what I told you about living longer. You can transform. The older you get, the more you know about life, better time it is to actually figure it out, but certainly better than going off the cuff. And I got two reactions. I either got, gosh, wow, that changes my perspective on life now. Yeah, because you don't have to wait till 62. It could be next year. And then the other people would say, that's interesting. I'll think about it. And then I'd see them 2 months later. Wow, that changes my perspective on life now. Everybody resonates with it. So I'd say that 80% of what I offer is worthwhile for any age, because a lot of it's how do you change? How do you deal with problems better? How do you figure out that new way forward? How do you accept the acceptance thing? Some of them are life tips like that, but a lot of it's how do you make that transformation and realize the opportunities that happen? How do you figure out what's right for you and get past the old BS that's in your head, the false beliefs, or the lack of being in touch with your values or what you value?
It is very true. This new way forward are going to impact a lot of people my age. Because as you have described, you call this new stage olderhood, while I call it beyondhood. Although we call it different term, we're both thinking in this life, if we do things right, physically, mentally, there will be a new stage of life that beyond people's imagination. Retirement wouldn't be what we think it was anymore, because we're going to have 40 or 50 years to live. Are we just really going to not do anything? When you mention your new way forward, the passion you have in your eye actually answer one of my questions, which is, what is your biggest passion in life now? Let's circle back a little bit in terms of your olderhood. There are two more questions I want to ask you to think back in your life right now at this point. First, how would you say was your biggest success? And second, what was your biggest mistake? And if you could go back, would you change it or you wouldn't? And how will you look at it now again?
My biggest failure was I did what I could, not what I should. So I never would have done Paul Long Productions, or it may have been a different manifestation of it. Because again, I only thought about, well, what could I do that I could succeed at and make some money at doing, rather than what's right for my whole life, even if it was a stepping stone, which sometimes we need to do. In fact, sometimes people who are older say, well, I need money now. It's like, well, go get a job now. Be a greeter at Walmart. Do whatever you got to do, but work on this. So that would be my biggest mistake. I'd say the biggest success is definitely family. Being in a relationship as long as I have that's still going strong, and the 2 sons that I've given, because that's not only important for those 2 lives, but in a way, that's how we give back to humanity and the world, by raising children who are going to contribute, who are going to be aware. By the way, the best advice I gave to the boys, and they'll roll their eyes because they probably heard it from me 50 times starting at 8, is that the way that you have a good life and advance the human race is to embrace the best and overcome the worst of your parents. Embrace the best and overcome. And they've done that. And they're better. That's what I would say are the 2 things.
We're coming to the end of our podcast, and there are 3 questions I always ask my Beyonder. First, do you have any regret in life, and what it is?
The regret that I would say that I have in my life is that I wasn't. A lot of people would consider me to be ambitious and willing to hang it out there, if you know what I mean. I could have done it even more so. Think now looking back, and my gosh, especially for you and your age group and such, you have more time. You have more possibilities. And I'll say to almost every human being, you are capable of so much more than you can really imagine. Right? If you said to me, I get that, I'd say, no, you don't. No, you don't, because you almost can't go too far. We are entitled. Those of us who show up, those of us who have good intentions, those of us who are determined, we are entitled, not automatically, but because we've earned it and because you're going to get what you need and want because you try. We are entitled to have the fullest, richest, most complete life possible. And it really is there for all of us that go after it, who will take the time, the self-awareness, the effort, the strategizing. One of the reasons why traditional retirement is working is because people go through their adult lives and everything, planning and strategizing and thinking about their career and how am I going to do this and that. Oh, and then I'll retire. It's like a notion. They never really think about it other than finances. Anyone who puts in that effort, I would love to be your age and have this kind of awareness. I will have made probably 15 pivots or with 3 transformations, whatever number, by the time I got to the age that I am now. Or maybe I find the idyllic thing that sticks with me the rest of my life. Who knows? But that's the point. There are those opportunities out there. Wish I had realized that sooner than I did.
Your biological age is still very young. From listening to you, you are still making the opportunity for yourself. You are creating opportunity and creativity. The second question I always ask is, what do you think of death? Are you religious? Do you believe in an afterlife?
Well, in the first place, I'm realistic. I don't know. Nobody. I mean, a lot of people believe, and I have a very strong belief. And even, you can even make an argument against people who had near-death experiences as to what it really was. I'm not tied to a religion, but I am a very spiritual person. And I do believe that there is some reason for existence and that there is a purpose behind it, because there's a purpose behind everything. And so I can't imagine that all of this is here and I'm talking about the known universe and we just die and that's it. The fact that out of every creature that we're aware of in the universe, we're the only ones who have a mind and what would be characterized as a soul. In my belief, there has to be a reason for it and that there has to be some higher power. Now, once I get to that point, if you say the word God to 50 people, you get 50 different opinions of what that means, even if they're in the same religious denomination. I don't know what's next, but I'm in no hurry to find out because it is inevitable. The day will come. I kind of feel like I'm at a party and I don't want to leave it until the time comes for it. It's not so much that I fear it. I'm not ready to go yet. I still want to enjoy my life. I still want to make a difference with what I'm doing now and see it actually move the needle and make an impact. I want the potential of grandchildren to come and that experience. And I want to just keep having fun at the party of life.
That is great. I love your analogy of you don't want to leave the party. My last question for you is, what is the one piece of advice you will share with the younger generation?
It is that you have more options, you have more possibilities that you are capable of achieving than you want. Avoid getting swept away by the general flow of life. Certainly ignore and fight against the default life that's defined by parents, society, bosses, marketers. There can be no greater investment that you make in your life. Think of all these things. Well, this is a good investment of time. This is a good investment. There's no greater investment than you can make is in yourself and your self-development. And when I say self-development, who do I want to be? What do I want to have? What do I need? And the ability to go after it. On top of all of that is that there are people a lot younger than me that aren't going to live as many more days as I'm going to be, because you never know what's going to happen, but you can't live that way. So let's say that you're going to live to 105. And you're going to be active. I posted something about a woman yesterday who works at Joanne. You saw that? 101, and she's still working at Joanne Fabrics and driving herself to work every day. And she just loves being with people. Whatever your age is, subtract that from 101, and that's not just being in a nursing home. Only 2% of Americans over the age of 80 are actually in a quote-unquote nursing. No, you can live healthy, active, independent. So what are you going to do with that? Now, you can't figure it out. You can't figure out what you want to do when you're 95, and you don't need to, but you can certainly realize you've got more options in time than you think about, and you're more capable of achieving and attaining what you truly value in life to meet the highest standards that you have for yourself.
Now we're at the end. How do you feel about sharing your life story? We started with your childhood, thinking about your parent, to all the way now you're doing New Way Forward.
Some of it I had to get used to. The story about my father, something no one knew about. And then one day I said, I got to write this because, now that I know that when I share it, it makes an impact, helps someone. And I'm not Mr. Airy Fairy. Oh, I want to make it today. I want to help people, everything. I do. That's the point of all of this. And it's the ultimate buzz. Get a response, just like I got from you or from other people, where we're all in this together and nobody gets out alive. So let's support each other. This was probably, I've done 100 podcasts before and vodcasts, and this was the best experience I ever had, because I realized by what Nicole was doing was that besides me being able to share some of what I've learned, what other people are finding useful to find, discover, and pursue the life they want, that diving deeper into my own personal experiences, going back to childhood, really gave it more depth and meaning. Because as I was talking about things that had happened to me, I realized I was giving the examples of the methods and the ways that I succeeded in doing mine. So this is a brilliant concept for people of any age to really learn how they can improve their lives, how they can pivot or transform their lives in a way that leads them to exactly what it is they need and want. So I'm really grateful to have been a part of it.
And that is a wrap of our interview.
Thank you so much. I feel the energy through our conversation, even we're not in person. I feel goosebumps having conversation with people like you, to exchange ideas, to talk about life, and to be curious how you live your life. Thank you. We're now on Patreon, a site where we provide rewards and perks to our subscriber, you. For as little as £3 per month, less than your cup of tea, you will get to see the exclusive Beyonders now and then picture. You walk around like a grown-up, without knowing you joined the most amazing and fun community to retrieve the ancient art of storytelling. Because stories shouldn't stop just because we have grown up. The Patreon site link will be on the show notes. Thank you. Before you leave, if you love this episode, please stay tuned for our next one. If you haven't done so, please follow Beyondhood in your favorite podcast listening app. Or you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you found this conversation inspirational or interesting or valuable, chances are you did, since you're still listening. Would you do me a personal favor, a 6-second favor? Share it on your social, email, or tell a friend. Tell a person you know who can benefit from this conversation, who you think will be inspired by our Beyonder, who is navigating how to age with grace and motivation so that they can join and be part of our mission. You guys can discuss. When a podcast becomes a chat becomes an action. Then we're closer to create a community where we go beyond elderhood, one story at a time.
Childhood, adolescent, adulthood, and